Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 274 through 276, which will cover manga chapters 389 through 394. And like I mentioned in the last podcast, these episodes have the first half of my favorite moment in all of One Piece. And yes, I can't wait to get into it. So let's start off with the synopsis. Frankie manages to get Robin unshackled from the wall and outside the tower, but are still separated from Luffy between the giant chasm. As the rest of the Straw Hats finally arrive to join Luffy in an epic stare down with the CP9 for the fate of Robin begins, we launch into Robin's past and the story of Ohara as well as its world famous scholars. Alrighty, so differences. There are a few differences, most of them pretty minor and don't have anything real major that they change about the story. The first one being when Frankie's holding off the Marines for Robin to talk to Luffy. For some reason, they don't actually show Frankie attacking them, and instead in the anime, it just cuts away to a random shot of the world government flag at the top of the Tower of Justice, and we only hear the sounds of the battle. But in the manga, there's clearly a panel showing Frankie firing his weapons left guns at the soldiers. I don't know why this was taken out, because it can't certainly be for violence, because we've seen Frankie shoot people up as well as the Marines shoot people up over and over. So I don't know why this was actually done. And it's a really awkward direction choice, I feel like. Another odd directing choice was how Kaku's kick to Frankie's face is depicted in the anime. It just seems so weird. I mean, it has this weird, like, squishy noise, and in the manga, this scene is portrayed way more brutally as Kaku just kind of appears out of nowhere and just slams Frankie's face into the sort of the guard wall on the tower. And I'll talk more about this in the episode thoughts as well. There's also Nami has a couple extra lines of dialogue about having a theory when Chopper asks, "What the hell was that?" after they got blasted up to the top of the tower. And Nami has a couple extra lines saying she has an idea of what that might have been. And then in that same scene, when Sanji finally arrives, we see Sanji from his perspective. He sees Zoro with an afro. And this obviously playing on the fact that he calls him a moss head or a marimo head. And this moment is actually not in the manga, but I am actually pretty happy they put it into the anime because it's a really funny shot of just Zoro with an afro. And then once we get to Robin's past and her flashback, in the very beginning, young Robin is actually hit with a rock in the manga and not a tomato as it's depicted in the anime. I don't know why I said tomato like that. But yeah, and the reason why she's got the tomato juice sort of coming down her face is actually because in the manga she has blood running down her face a little bit. And then lastly, in the flashback, in the manga there's a scene where it actually explains where Robin gets the bread that she actually feeds to Sal. There's a couple panels that show her her abusive foster parents getting angry that they can't find Robin and that all the bread and jam is missing. And this scene was left out of the anime for some reason. I don't know if it was cut for maybe time, but yeah, it's not in the anime. Anyways, that's it for the differences. So let's get into the thoughts on this episode, or these 3 episodes. So as Spandam is freaking out over Luffy basically reaching the doorsteps of the Tower of Justice, Frankie tries to talk some sense into Robin to get her to finally accept that they're willing to do anything to rescue her, but there's still something holding her back from all of this. But Frankie tells her that he's going to make it so that she can at least see Luffy's face and they can have it out directly. And the method he uses to accomplish this is nothing short of disturbing yet pretty hilarious, as he begins to inflate his ass to preposterous proportions, bluffing Spandam and everyone in the room that he's about to blow himself up along with everyone else in the room. But in truth, he grabs Robin with his legs and rockets them outside in what can only be described as an explosive fart called the coup de boo, boo being the colloquial word for the sound of a fart in Japanese. And it's funny because even in the aftermath, the agents or the Marine soldiers comment on the fact that the smoke that dispels from Frankie kind of smells a little bit, which is absolutely gross. And I can't believe Frankie has a move like this. But another funny thing about this scene is that the scene with Spandam sort of dancing as he panics about Frankie blowing everyone up cracks me up every time. Like I love seeing gifs of this because of the fact that he's just kind of like shimmying back and forth with his head above his head or his hands above his head. It's always a funny sight to see. But yeah, Frankie at this point has really cemented himself as a really good guy. As not only did he get her in front of Luffy, he provides cover from the Marines and the world government agents so that the two can finally talk. And like I mentioned in the differences section, for some reason you don't actually get to see this in the anime as it just cuts to a random shot of the flag and you hear the sounds of Frankie attacking. It's yeah, like I said, it's such a weird decision. It's not as if they're cutting it for violence or anything cuz like I said, we've seen Frankie use his weapon left on people in the past. Luffy, excited to finally be able to get Robin back, immediately tries to Gomu Gomu no rocket across, but is stopped by a clearly anguished Robin, barking back at Luffy angrily, saying that she didn't ask for any of this and that she doesn't want to go back to them, stating her desire is to die, which is just truly heartbreaking and disheartening to hear. But it just serves to further highlight just how immense the pressure of the CP9, the world government, and her past really is. Whatever happened with all of that has made her believe that dying is a better alternative to being rescued. And I'm sure there's also a sense of immense guilt as well, as it's definitely been alluded to the fact that she views herself as a criminal or an existence that is a blight on the world. And that immense guilt probably also adds to the fact that, yeah, she feels like she doesn't deserve to live, on top of the fact that it's being reinforced by the most powerful organization or source of power in the world, being the world government and the Gorosei. Not to mention, I'm sure she believes that even if they were to rescue her, that they'd always be constantly on the run and they'd never stand a chance against the might of the world government. And yeah, all of that combined really does kind of seem insurmountable. But yeah, we really need to see her flashback, and thankfully we'll get it soon. Anyways, Frankie's visibly pissed off at her reaction, given all that he's done to give her this chance and knowing what the Straw Hats have gone through to get to this point. But before he can say much, his face is smashed in by Kaku, and by now it's too late as the entirety of the CP9 have arrived surrounding Robin on all sides. And another weird directing decision is how they choose to portray Kaku's kick in the anime, like I mentioned in the differences section. In the anime, it loses its impact and brutality. It's sort of a light kick with a squish sound effect, and Frankie kind of just gets thrown up against the wall. But the way this kick is portrayed in the manga is really hard, as he just kind of shows up out of nowhere and slams Frankie's face into the wall and smashes it like 10 times harder than it's portrayed in the anime. I mean, ultimately, it really doesn't detract from the anime, but it's just an odd directing choice that kind of lessens the portrayal of Kaku's strength and brutality. It's also supposed to imply that he's a little annoyed with the devil fruit power he got, or he's annoyed at Jabura making fun of him for it. Either way, it was a way for him to vent some of that annoyance and take it out on Frankie, and that kick doesn't really come across as such in the anime. So yeah, I mean, again, it kind of just takes away a little bit from Kaku's character. With that, though, the rest of the CP9 get a great reintroduction with their awesome music blaring as they comment and sneer at Bluno being defeated. It's interesting that they show almost no concern or compassion for Bluno, being even while being one of their, team members. They just merely stating the fact that being a bartender for 5 years has made him soft to the point where Jabura even outright laughs at him. Most likely, he is doing that because, that's one less person he needs to contend with in terms of his status in the CP9. And in the manga, this moment with all of them together on the balcony is given this awesome 2-page spread, and it looks amazing. And of course, you get to see it in the opening Brand New World as well as you get to see it here. But yeah, it can't be understated how like awesome seeing the CP9 gathered like this, because these are the guys that they're going to be, or the Straw Hats are going to be fighting against, and it's pretty insane to see them all together at once. We then see what is happening down below as everyone is struggling a bit to get their respective missions completed, with Yokozuna finally being exhausted and downed. But just in time, Sogeking along with Oimo and Kashi arrive to save Yokozuna and help out. The Frankie family tells Sogeking that the rest of the Straw Hats have already left to go up to the top, and then we get a pretty funny setup as Kashi tells Sogeking that he should just leave the rest up to him, implying that they'll help him get up there really quickly, which at the time I'm sure we can all kind of guess as to what he's going to do to get him up there, but we'll see that in a few minutes. We also see Nami and Chopper struggling to get past all those enemy forces, including those big ass wrecking ball guys, while Zoro again is lost on the floors beneath them. As well as Baskerville explains to Zanbai and the Frankie family that in the history of the Enies Lobby, no one has ever been found not guilty, which kind of implies just how biased and corrupt the judicial system is of the world government and in the world of One Piece, all to maintain their absolute power over the world. And for many of the criminals, their only real salvation, if you could even call it that, is to work for the world government, which, in the words of the great Morty Smith, is just slavery with extra steps. Zoro, who's tired of trying to figure out directions, as we see him go in one door and immediately come out the other, which makes no sense, he then comes up with his own solution and creates his own way up by using Tatsumaki to blast his way up. But in the process, he deals with the enemies that Nami and Chopper are stuck behind, but also inadvertently catch them in the gust as well, sending them flying up. Back on the roof, it sounds like Luffy is going to impassionately plead to Robin, and Spandam is just relishing this until he actually sees how casual Luffy is with all of this, as we cut to him picking his nose of all things as the rest of the Straw Hats come bursting out triumphantly from the roof behind him. And what Oda has Luffy say here is amazing in that it fits his character and philosophy so well. Luffy is all about freedom, and that's a huge theme in One Piece, and his goal is being the freest person in the world, and he certainly doesn't want to impose his will on other people and take that freedom away from them. So by Luffy saying that since they're already here, you might as well come back with us, and if you still want to die, that's fine. But at least do it besides us, with your friends, where you're truly free to make a decision based solely on what your actual desires are, not, being coerced into it. And that's just like perfect character writing here by Oda, and it makes a lot of sense. Luffy doesn't necessarily want to take that choice away from her, that if she truly does want to end her life, Luffy's more than willing to let her do that, but he wants it in an environment that's as free as possible so that she can truly say what is actually in her heart. And of course, Luffy being the emotional, intelligent genius he is, he pretty much already knows what Robin's actual feelings are. And then within minutes, Sanji comes blasting through the roof as well, thinking he's the first one up there. But in fact, he's already behind Nami, Chopper, and even Zoro of all people. And this starts somewhat of a small running gag throughout the rest of the series, where Zoro often beats Sanji to places despite how bad at directions he is. But one of the weirdest yet funniest directing choices is to show Zoro from Sanji's perspective with a massive green afro, make him actually look like a Marimo moss ball. I will never get over how funny that scene looks. I mean, whoever decided to throw that in there is a pure genius. And then finally, to pay off the Sogeking side of things, we see Sogeking in the back soaring up through the air as he was thrown up there by Kashi, coming full circle with that joke as well. With everyone finally gathered together, this is where things get to the epic level that I have never seen or experienced. This moment, combined with the rest of the scene, which we'll see several episodes later after the flashback, is easily the best and my favorite moment in One Piece. I mean, it's just incredible. The way this moment has been built up with the tension of getting everyone there, with the heroes and villains all in one place, and the emotion we feel finally seeing the crew all yelling that they want Robin back is just so incredible. Not to mention, the score here is incredible with the emotional and lighthearted strings playing to symbolize the hope that they all bring to Robin, but then they all compose themselves and then move into serious mode. The music then slowly transitions into this epic music with the deeper strings like the cello, bass, as well as the brass and percussion getting increasingly louder as they all walk up to the edge, joining Luffy, lining up and flanking him on either side. And that shot of the six of them standing there is nothing short of euphoric. I don't even know how to describe how amazing this moment was when I first saw it. It just makes you want to jump up and cheer, but at the same time, you're on the edge of your seat in anticipation of how all of this will play out. And this is one thing that I haven't really mentioned until now about the entire series and Oda's writing as a whole, but it has been present in the entire series thus far. It's Oda's ability to make you feel so many different emotions at the same time. Now, normally it can feel pretty overwhelming, like your mind is just being pulled in a billion different directions, but at the same time, you still know exactly what is the most important thing you should be feeling. It's unlike anything you will ever feel consuming any type of media. The only other moment I can kind of equate to this is perhaps the Portals moment from Avengers Endgame. But even then, it still doesn't quite reach the heights and the hype and the emotion I was feeling for this moment, the NES lobby stare down. And this literally blows Robin away as she's shocked to see them all here before them, and this gust of wind blows at her as if it came from their will to save her as she tears up, and Luffy epically reassures her to leave the rest up to them. And like seriously, this is peak One Piece and this is peak fiction. It's although the crazy thing is this moment will get better and better. But however, we will need to wait a few more episodes before we get to see the conclusion to this amazing scene, as we finally get Robin's flashback in the middle of this. So we'll have to wait a little bit longer for this moment to actually conclude. But before that, we get a couple more lines of dialogue with Spandam trying to intimidate the Straw Hats by showing off the golden Denden Mushi and the threat of the Buster Call. However, the Straw Hats, and even apparently Spandam, don't really know the real effects and consequences of the Buster Call, as Robin desperately tries to get Spandam to realize what he's actually wielding. And Yuriko Yamaguchi's performance here is bone-chilling, as you really feel the terror that Robin feels coming right through the screen, as Robin's the only person, probably in the world, that truly understands the destructiveness of the Buster Call. And I especially like the line where Robin talks about how, because of how the world government views the world as strategic points on a map, that they're unable to see the real people that they actually impact, which is why they can make such cruel measures without any thought. And this is even true to some extent when it comes to warfare in our real world. You know how world leaders and governments can so callously send people into war, many times unnecessarily, and or target and destroy areas without really giving any thought to the innocent civilians that they're putting in harm's way. And it's really disheartening and sad, especially given what we're seeing unfold in the war over in Ukraine at the time of this recording. But yeah, bottom line is the world needs a little bit more empathy and critical thinking all around. Anyways, not to get too far into the geopolitics or anything like that. But yeah, with that, though, we'll launch into Robin's flashback finally. And it starts with an adorably cute 8-year-old Robin being pelted with a tomato from some bullies, calling her a yokai or a monster due to her devil fruit powers. Although in the manga, like I mentioned in the differences section, she actually gets hit with a small rock, and it's not tomato juice running down her face, it's actual blood. Robin retaliates by bonking them on the head with her Hana powers. Although in the manga, the woman that comes to reprimand Robin has less ground to stand on when she says that her kids didn't do anything, when it's clear Robin's, got a head wound and she's leaking blood. So that sort of way that it's depicted in the manga makes it even more apparent just how prejudiced the other people in the town are towards Robin, which is a little lost in the anime because of the fact that the tomato is replaced, or the rock is replaced with the tomato, and so it kind of lessens that impact a little bit. And as a side note, while yokai are monsters, and to be more specific, in Japanese folklore, they're more like malevolent spirits, or if you watch Yokai Watch, it is to be believed that they're cute little ghost pets. But they're more closer to another game which heavily features yokai, which is the Neo series, and they're more horrifying demon-like monsters and ghosts. After she runs away into town, it's implied that even now, as an 8-year-old, Robin is an orphan with no parents as she longingly looks at other happy families. But this scene for me is always undercut in the anime at the hilariously misspelled book cover. It's clearly supposed to be archaeology, but someone at Toei wrote it as archaeology. I think what happened here was someone looked at the manga and there is one panel where you get a decent look at the cover, but because it's not the clearest look, it's kind of under her arm from a distance and the Y is a little obscured and it does look like an I, as well as the G looks like it wasn't colored in all the way and it's the sharpness is missing, making it look like an S, as well as the D already looking kind of like an O. So I can kind of understand, but it's like, seriously, how did no one at Toei check this or confirm with Oda or his editors? I mean, unless this was some sort of an inside joke that I'm not aware of, it just seems really weird and distracting as a native English speaker. We then see an expansion to one of the moments from Robin's past that we actually have been able to glean from things like the Bon Voyage opening theme or the various ending themes like Tsukito Taiyo or Asuwa Kurukara, of her loneliness, and particularly that scene where she's always curled up in a bed by herself, living in that little home. But it's even more depressing and sad as it seems she's living in some sort of a neglected foster family type situation, similar to Cinderella or Harry Potter. We get our first glimpse that even before a life of crime and being on the run, she's been on her own and unable to depend on anyone. But there is one bright spot in her life as she is loved by the folks at the Ohara Library and the archaeologists and scholars there. They surprise her with a party congratulating her on passing the exam to get her doctorate in archaeology, which is insane. I mean, how much of a genius is Robin with a PhD at 8 years old is just unreal. And that's her real superpower. Forget about the devil fruit. I mean, that's incredible. And we're introduced to her mentor, Professor Clover, whose hairstyle and beard game is on point with his name. Another note, as it's never shown in the anime, but in the manga, there's a little title card for the big tree structure Robin goes to, which is the Ohara Library and Archaeological Research Facility, which is built in the giant tree referred to as the Tree of Knowledge. Or, if literally translated, it actually translates to Tree of Omniscience. We then get some much needed exposition on the Void Century, as that is what Robin truly wants to research and learn as an archaeologist. However, everyone, including Clover, are shocked and horrified to learn that she even knows about that, as well as the poneglyphs. And we learn that any research into these subjects has been illegal for 800 years, and that they're all researching it with the understanding that they're all putting their lives at risk doing so. But they don't want Robin to shoulder that kind of risk yet, as she's just far too young. He goes on to explain that the researchers here in Ohara are the only ones to have figured out how to read the poneglyphs, which is why Robin, as the last known survivor of Ohara, is sought so hard after by the underworld as well as the world government. We also learn that Robin's mother, Olvia, I always want to call her Olivia, but it's actually Olvia, is in fact still alive, but she is also an archaeologist chasing after the mystery of the Void Century. But she's been captured, and while you do sympathize for Robin, it's really understandable that the other archaeologists don't want to lead Robin down such a dangerous path, especially at such a young age. To me, the concept and mystery of the Void Century is one of the biggest and most intriguing mysteries in all of One Piece. I mean, for me, it's probably right up there with the One Piece itself. I think for me, it's so interesting because it seems like that is actually the key to understanding the world of One Piece and figuring out why the world is the way it is. And it could help to explain many of the other mysteries. But more importantly, I think it's actually directly related to whatever the One Piece is. I mean, that's just a personal theory of mine, but, we'll see, hopefully. But yeah, it is very, very interesting, whatever the Void Century is, especially given the significance as we'll see towards the end of these episodes, as well as the episodes following in the next podcast. But for now, let's continue on as Robin runs away in sadness and frustration as she's magically on the beach during the day now. I mean, it was nighttime when she was there, so are we to assume she's been walking around all night? Or did she go home? And yeah, anyways, the timeline really is kind of weird in this. But she runs across a washed up giant, of all things, which tries to scare her away, but is unsuccessful as it doesn't really scare Robin one bit. But he's also dying from thirst, so his energy for trying to get Robin away does not really go far. Robin, being the nice girl she is, helps him to some water, saving his life. The giant explains that he's not one of those barbaric giants from Elbaf, which is an interesting detail there, that there are other tribes or cultures even within the giants. They're not all from Elbaf, which is something I had not actually considered, because the only giants we've seen so far are from Elbaf. Again, Oda with that small detail and sort of expanding his world. I love it. Anyways, young Robin here is just so adorably cute here as she blushes when the giant tells her that she looks cute when she laughs. And he then finally warms up to her enough to introduce himself, and his name is Hagwar D. Sal. And immediately everyone's ears perk up as he's a D. He doesn't really know what it means, and neither does any of his family, and his whole family has had that name, but he's the fourth D to be introduced in the series, and it comes from an incredibly unlikely and unexpected place. But it does seem a little bit of a fate for Robin to meet someone named D, and it also could explain her sort of initial interest in Luffy when she finds out that he is a D, and which is maybe why she was so interested in him during Whiskey Peak, as well as all throughout Alabasta or Arabasta, because of her relationship with Sal here. Now, as a side note, I know it's written as Jaguar, but I'm going to pronounce it Hagwar, as that's how it's pronounced in Japanese, and I believe this is intentional, because in Japanese, the actual way to say the animal jaguar is called jaga. So it's not like they don't have that hard J sound when they're referring to a jaguar. So I'd argue that Hagwar is the correct pronunciation, as at least in Oda's mind. And also, on another side note, Sal is voiced by a very recognizable voice in One Piece and Dragon Ball Z, among other prominent roles, as he is played by Takeshi Kusao, who has played Koza in One Piece, as well as his most famous role, which I've already mentioned in past podcasts, of being future Trunks from DBZ. With that out of the way, we now realize Sal is going to be a rather important character in this story, as we know all the Ds are special, and it'll be interesting to learn if this flashback will shed some light on the will of D, which is another huge mystery that is persistent throughout the entire series. And I love these bonding scenes between Sal and Robin, as they learn a little bit more of each other and build a budding friendship, and probably one of the most poignant lessons or life philosophies that I occasionally employ. So when Robin mentions how weird Sal's laugh is, he goes on to explain if you laugh, it'll make you happy, because you laugh when you're happy. So therefore, when you laugh, it'll bring you joy. So when you're going through, hard times, you should try and laugh. And there's actually a lot of scientific truth to this, as one thing they often tell you to kind of put you in a better mood is to sort of force yourself to smile or laugh, and it actually does seem to have an effect on improving your mood. And also, Sal's laugh is easily one of the best in the series. I think it's up there in my top 10 of the best laughs in One Piece, as he does the dere shi 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 shi. And it's even made even better because Robin tries to use it as well, and it's really cute seeing her do that dere shi shi shi. And yeah, I love this laugh. It's definitely up there along with like NL's laugh and Crocodile's laugh as well. Next, we see that the people that are most likely pursuing Sal are the world government in what looks like an earlier version of the CP9, with most likely Spandam's father, with his name being Spandine, and being voiced by the same voice actor, Masaya Onosaka. 4 days later, we see that Robin's mom, Olvia, is in fact alive and has now arrived in Ohara as well. And the next scene, we get to see the scholars in a bit of a panic over the Marines arriving, as well as Sal having completed his raft, to leave. They eventually get into a conversation about her being an archaeologist, her mother, as well as the Void Century. And Saul then puts all these things together and realizes that Robin's mom is actually Nico Olvia, which is the woman he's been on the run with, and that he knows that the world government is actually headed to Ohara to wipe out the scholars. And to his horrified shock, he's actually on Ohara right now. Things now have become really tense as Robin learns from Saul that Olvia is probably back too, and in fact, she's come to warn everyone as the research team that Olvia was part of was slaughtered by the Marines, and they've traced them back to Ohara. After warning the archaeologists, Olvia then goes out to try and create distance with the scholars of Ohara and just runs past Robin without either of them realizing each other, which is just heartbreaking. And one thing about the Void Century research that you wonder why it's so important, particularly with the sacrifice that Olvia makes to leave Robin at 2 years old to continue this research. And it just kind of adds to the gravity of it, as we, the audience, don't quite know what the significance of why discovering what happened during this Void Century is so important enough to risk your life and family over it. Which is why I think Oda does such a great job of telling us how significant and the weight of this research is without actually being able to tell us what it is, by surrounding him with all these sort of risks and sacrifices that people have to make just to do the research, as well as just how far the world government will go to prevent this from being accomplished, to the point where they call in a younger Aokiji, who is currently a vice admiral and not yet promoted to an admiral, which is why they actually refer to him by his real name, Kuzan, as opposed to his admiral codename, Aokiji. We then see Olvia find Spandine and learns what the world government's true intentions for coming to Ohara is. And it's not just to reprimand the scholars, but to actually make an example out of them and to warn the rest of the world to never try and touch the poneglyphs and find the truth of the Void Century. It's really starting to look ugly as Olvia is taken down and Saul witnesses over a dozen marine gunships off the coast. And with all the scholars rounded up, Spandine is ready to report their success to the Gorosei. And Professor Clover uses this opportunity to request to talk to the Gorosei to explain their hypothesis of the true reason for the Void Century. And it's interesting that the Gorosei have the entire world fooled except for the scholars of Ohara. Even Spandine, their top intelligence agency leader, is believed that they're doing something righteous as protecting the world against a dangerous ancient weapon. And I'm sure there's some truth to that, but like we've all surmised, there is something way bigger than that when it comes to the Void Century. But unfortunately, the episode ends there before we actually get the reveal, so we'll have to wait till the next podcast. But yeah, what a suspenseful place to end the podcast. But we will be back next time with the tragic conclusion, as well as the completion to the best moment in One Piece, at least in mine, and I think in many other people's opinions. If you've seen this part, you all know, and even if you haven't, there is a good chance you've already seen this scene because it is definitely one of the most famous and poignant and epic. It's all the superlatives you can think of. That's this scene that's coming up in the next episode, where we get to the other half to the start of that scene of where they're all staring each other down. But anyways, like I said, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast if you want updates of when I post new episodes. That would be greatly appreciated. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast. I guess I'll have a really mini spoiler section just to kind of talk about the Void Century a little bit. But if you're not interested in those spoilers, I hope you stay safe out there and hope to see you on the next episode. Bye. Alrighty, so spoiler section. I'm not really gonna go too much into a deep dive about this topic, but the Void Century is definitely one of the most interesting things. I think for me, I'm almost more curious about the Void Century than even the One Piece, to be quite honest, because I think they're almost kind of one and the same, to be quite frank. At least that's my working theory. just kind of how everything seems to come back to this missing chunk of history. And we've gotten a lot of more development over what this possibly could be, especially with the introduction of the celestial dragons and how they've basically been covering things up this whole time. And there was this great war, as well as with the original Joy Boy and his sort of promise to free the world, but he was unable to do so and was defeated by the original 20 kingdoms, and eventually the celestial dragons took over. And it's sort of this idea that whatever this information is, or whatever the truth about what happened in this 100-year time span, seems to be incredibly damaging to whatever the world government and the celestial dragons, as well as the Gorosei, and maybe even Imu, um, all of their goals seem to hinge on the fact that nobody ever finds out what happened in this void century. And so it's just like incredibly intriguing. Like, why would this be so important? Like, what could it possibly be? And I know there are tons of theories out there, and there are way other better people that can explain theories surrounding what the void century could be. But it is an incredibly intriguing aspect when you start putting all the different pieces together, whether it be Joy Boy, whether it be the celestial dragons, Emu, that big ass straw hat inside the vault, and just how much significance is placed on it, as well as the poneglyphs, not only leading you to Laugh Tale, as well as what the Void Century is, and which is why I personally believe that the poneglyphs, being sort of the guide to the One Piece, seems to be related to the fact that, yeah, I think they're both one and the same, or very related. However, one thing that I am a little hung up on is Roger's reaction to reaching Laugh Tale, as well as his crew, is how once they got to Laugh Tale, they all laughed. I mean, which is why it's called Laugh Tale. And I don't know what kind of information they would have learned that would have elicited that kind of a response, if something so damaging to the world government is that. And so that kind of makes me believe that the information itself isn't the One Piece, but I do think it's related to it, as if like maybe learning what the Void Century is will help you reach Laugh Tale. But yeah, there's a lot to it, but I won't get too much more into it, as this episode is getting a little long. So I'll kind of leave it there. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time. See ya.